Well, good afternoon, Deborah. Thanks for joining us today. How did you get into travel, and what has been your path in your career in the travel industry?
So I'm not, I came out of the television world actually. So I kind of fell into the travel industry. And I would say I'm not really in the travel industry from the perspective of, booking travel or any of that kind of thing. But I have worked for Billy Bishop Airport for the last 12 years or so. So in terms of consumer trends, traveler trends, that kind of thing, I have definitely been following that over the last several years in the terms of how our business has evolved and how travel has evolved, and then how Billy Bishop Airport has been able to sort of address some of the changes that we've seen in consumer travel behavior.
Excellent. So my background is a little varied and a little different than yours.
Mhm.
I've been involved in digital media for the last 16 or 17 years. Started out as a marketing manager, sort of just being a grunt, doing all the work, building campaigns, to now moving into more of a strategy and marketing science role. I've worked on multiple DTC brands and subscription businesses, both in Toronto and in California. And now I'm in Toronto at Hearts and Science, which is an agency which is a part of MediaCom.
Okay, interesting.
So we both come into travel in different
Yeah.
perspectives. Large scale consumer behavior and analytics sort of inform both of our worlds. What are some of the changes that you've witnessed in travel, both on like a booking behavior or just even just customer behavior as they're coming into YTZ?
Yeah. I mean, think definitely, coming out of COVID, there's been a real change in the way that travel happens. I think going into 2020, travel behaviors and travel sort of demands were a little bit different. And I think coming out of COVID, there's been a change in terms of business travel, for example, and formats like Teams and Zoom and all of that kind of thing have somewhat offset the need to go get on a plane and travel for business. However, business travel continues to be quite strong. So clearly, there's still that need for, personal interaction and connection and making those sort of business connections face to face. But certainly, that's something that's changed. I think in terms of leisure travel, there's more of a need for experiences as opposed to just going to a destination. I think people are a little bit more keen on, traveling somewhere for an experience, and the destination is almost the sort of second priority. It's more about seeking that special thing. And I think one of the things, just as an example of that I found really interesting is, people traveling for concerts would be an example of traveling for an experience. I mean, I honestly don't remember people traveling for concerts in the past. You sort of just waited for that that experience to
Yeah.
come to you. You'd go and you'd hope that your favorite singer is going to come to Toronto, for example. But I think one of the things I've just noticed anecdotally is just that sort of need to have a really rich travel experience, with the destination being almost a variable in the thing.
That's a good point. I've noticed that even in our own travel, my wife and I went to Thailand end of December,
Mm.
and the way that we booked all of our experiences at this time versus any other time that we've traveled is a heavy use on AI recommendations, right?
Mhm.
So you'll say, this is who we are, mid 40s,
Yeah.
we want to travel and do this, we're scuba divers, and you get much more granular responses now, and you can tailor your own trip. Whereas, in the past, you would go on Sunwing, click your all inclusive, and then, sort of call it a day and see what happens on your trip, sort of organically.
Yeah.
Now, I think people are taking a little bit more of a front seat and navigating their own excursions that they probably wouldn't find just from a Google search, right?
Mhm.
Like, yeah,
Yeah.
I think large language models are really good at matching a personality to an experience that could be off the beaten path.
Yeah.
See, that's the biggest way that I see travel is growing in the next 5 years, is that sort of self-personalization. So I'm sure a lot of brands will pick up on that and start leveraging it, but I think in the interim, it's people just kind of building these trips themselves because it
Mhm.
is really easy to do. and you tend to not see the AI hallucination when it's like, I want to find a dive shop in location XYZ.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting how AI is kind of, in some ways, it's broadened the search. So if you don't really know what you're looking for, I think AI is really good at giving you those ideas. But then it's also very good at narrowing the search in the sense that if you are going to a place with lots of options, I think it's a really good way to sort of narrow down exactly what you're looking for. So it's an expander and also a reducer in terms of based on how you're coming into the travel booking experience. If you know exactly what you want, I think AI is very good at identifying and validating those choices. And if you
Yeah.
don't know what you want, then I think it's really good to sort of just throw it out there and see what comes back.
Yeah, and both, I mean, there's lots of travelers that fall into both categories.
Hmm.
Speaking of, just moving from destination to destination, earlier this year there were reports of budget airlines considering standing seats. I'm sure Ryanair was part of that
Hmm.
cohort, to reduce fares. Where do you see opportunities for growth in travel? Is sort of creating something that's below economy the way to go, or is it providing value the way that Cathay Pacific does? So if you order an economy seat on Cathay Pacific, you get a much different experience than a lot of North American brands. You get a quality meal, a quality drinks, and there's a level of service that isn't present in North America, and the tickets should be more expensive because some of the routes they have a monopoly on them. And by all logic, they should be much more expensive, but they're not, and the quality is higher. So where do you see travel going now that there's sort of a resurgence in travel, kind of in the way that there's a resurgence to return to office? Do you see an expectation of higher quality, or is the market going to tolerate this sort of discount bin travel and trying to nickel dime the consumer every way that you possibly can?
I think the two will exist concurrently. I think that the economy is a real factor in people's travel decisions right now, and I think people who are more inclined to go for the higher end experience are probably a little bit more insulated from some of the economic challenges that some are facing. So I think definitely there are those travelers who go for I want a quality experience. I want to feel well taken care of. I don't want to be nickel and dimed along the way. And I think that traveler will continue to exist.
Yeah.
And then I think that there's also the traveler who it's about the destination, not the trip, not the travel to get to the destination necessarily, and don't necessarily have the means to be spending a lot of money. So I don't necessarily think I would ever sign up for the stand-up seats that some airlines have introduced, or the reduced leg room that some airlines have introduced. But I think that there's going to be room for both. There's going to be room for I'll call it luxury travel, and then there's also going to be room for more budget travel. And then the only thing I would say is I think there needs to be clearer definition of what both entail, particularly on the budget side, because if you're going to sign up for budget, then you just need to be okay with the fact that there's less leg room and you're going to pay for the bags and there's, incremental costs along the way. So I think what is sort of irritating is the people who sign up for the budget experience and then complain about the budget experience. So now that might be, a little bit of lack of communication, but certainly, if the communication is clear in terms of what you get and don't get, buyer beware. So I think the two will continue to exist. And I think what you might see less of is that sort of middle ground where, it is value and it is also comfort. At the end of the day, all the travel companies have margins they're working with. They have to keep the businesses viable. So, they're trying to introduce ways of cutting costs that will still allow them to have a healthy margin so they can keep their business profitable. And then I think it's just up to people to make sure they educate themselves in terms of what the trade-offs are for something like a budget trip.
I agree with you, but I think if you're trying that budget route, I think a lot of people get frustrated when they say, "Oh, this ticket is $300 instead of 500," and then they end up, having to pay for a bag, having to pay, extra fees on top of everything. Like, sometimes just paying for a carry-on, right? So
Mhm.
it ends up being the same unit cost, but a worse experience. So like, I think airlines have a very unique skill in making this commodity worse than it should be.
Mhm.
And if it's $500, it's $500. Just do that, and
Mhm.
don't just build in a resentment, which I think a lot of airlines are really good at doing. There's definitely some winners out there, but
Mhm.
I think there's room for growth at the
Mhm.
same dollar amount.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the airlines, if we're using them as an example, and I think it's the airlines being clear or clearer in terms of what is included in that cost, and then the passenger understanding exactly what they're giving up. So they are getting that $300 fare, but they're giving up certain other things. I mean, I'm guilty of it myself. I just came back from a trip from Mexico, got a great trip price going down there, and then on the way back, randomly, I was charged for baggage. I wasn't charged on the way down, but I was charged on the way back when I already had my bags with me.
Yeah, or the ever famous pay to have your or select your seat, and then
Mhm.
if you just wait, 30 minutes before a flight, suddenly it's free. It's kind of it's not a great user experience for everyone.
Yeah.
So there's an enormous amount of consumer data captured in the travel journey, from biometrics to the loyalty programs. Every brand has multiple touch points with a user. There's plenty of benefits for the groups capturing that data, but how can it be used to improve the benefits for a passenger? So kind of like when I'm thinking, like, if you're booking a flight and you have a specific meal selection like vegetarian or whatever your preference is, how come the platforms never remember that, right?
Mhm.
All of this data is tracked. They're good at pixeling you for remarketing, but the sort of user experience that people expect is, if I'm a business traveler who typically books flights on Thursdays and I pick an aisle seat, that should sort of be pre-populated, right? If my behavior is that strong of a preference, this data should be used to make my life easier rather than having to re-enter this data constantly.
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenge is that everyone gathers the data, so there's no shortage of data being gathered, and we get that in multiple touch points along a travel journey. I think the limitation is that the different partners on that travel journey don't or can't share that data. And I get that because there's obviously huge considerations around data privacy. And there needs to be some, really strong frameworks and guidelines around how data is shared among travel partners. But I think that's kind of where the challenge is some of that information, if it was kind of stitched together, then I think it could be really beneficial to the overall travel experience. So it would predict your behavior. And my biggest thing is when you have to fill out the same form 3 different times. I don't understand why I can't fill out that form once and it kind of travels with me and follows me along the way. So I think that's kind of the barrier to data. The collection is the easy part. Using it's the trickier part, both in terms of using it for things that ultimately benefit the traveler, but then also making sure that all the touch points along the way sort of have access to the same data. But I think anything that we can do to use the data so that, for example, you're getting highly relevant content, so it knows. I mean, we already see that to a degree. I always joke that be careful what you say when your phone is around, because the programmatics will flood your for you page with things that you just talked about, whether you want to or not. But there is something beneficial to data usage that can be predictive, so it knows what you need before you need it. When it can be used in a disruption, I mean, I think that's where we would all agree that we really need data used, is when there's been a disruption in our travel, or there's something that's gone amiss. That's where that I think that data can really come in handy. But ultimately, I think it's about using it to smooth out the travel journey rather than just create checkpoints along the way where you have to do the same thing over again, or this system wasn't communicating with this system, or it lost your travel history. All of that. I think there's definitely huge opportunity to improve that.
Definitely. Speaking of like leaving your phone on and your phone listening and then marketing to you,
Mhm.
I think it goes a layer deeper now. So if you're watching streaming television and an ad comes up, that ad can project a frequency that is then tracked through your phone to see whether or not you saw that ad, or heard that ad, or whether your phone heard that ad. It'll be interesting to see how that data is then used on targeted TV. Anyway, that's an
Mhm.
aside, but
Yeah, I think the problem with data right now is I feel like the data that's collected on me, for example, it just wants to sell to me. And I wish that data could be used to actually make my
yeah,
life better. So it's not just about selling a product. It's about, again, giving you whether it's in the context of travel or anything, it's just giving you those things that make life easier, that smooths out the bumps, that makes frictionless travel happen, where systems are speaking to each other.
yeah.
But again, data privacy is also a real concern as well. So I don't know what the perfect solution is to that.
No, you're right. Data privacy is a big concern, but also just within the data that a brand owns. Because you're right, a lot of brands, they are really great at collecting a fire hose worth of data. They use 10% of it to sell to you, and then they use the rest as sort of building an audience to then sell to you later
Mhm.
on down the, or build lookalikes off of you to then get other customers that look like you, but not to encourage recency and frequency to your brand. It's more just to sell to you like a blunt instrument.
Mhm.
I think there needs to be a little bit more nuance in promoting recency and frequency to a brand, to an experience. I used Cathay Pacific earlier because I think, have figured it out really well. It's a phenomenal airline that uses data to personalize when you're booking a flight. They will remember your preferences. They are really solid at doing that, and they're really good at not overcharging you for selecting seats, even just base economy.
Mhm.
Uh,
Yeah.
I think there's a lot to be learned from some of the A players in the travel space.
Mhm.
For travel brands specifically, defining marketing success seems unclear other than sales. With that, how would you define KPIs for marketing success?
Um, well, I mean, I think we've talked a lot about quality of experience. So I think to the degree that you can use metrics and KPIs to, um, you know, measure demand certainly, and whether the efficacy of a campaign or a sales opportunity translates into demand and purchase. But I think that KPIs tied to quality are also really important, and value. So I think unfortunately a lot of businesses, travel and otherwise, like all businesses, it's more about the numbers, and I think it's harder to measure those intangibles around value and experience quality and things like that. So I think KPIs for travel to really, move to that next level, particularly in sort of the luxury space, I think that those KPIs need to be tied a little bit more to, value. So if you are paying more, what is the value proposition for that? And measuring that, I think that is sort of currently we're just more about, whether something translated into bums and seats or, bodies and beds or whatever, right? It's all about kind of getting those people through the door and not necessarily measuring the quality of the experience that got them there.
Yeah, you're right. It seems like just one-off sales is the goal rather than building lifetime value over a customer's
Mhm.
experience, because very few people travel once and then call it a day.
Yeah. Yeah,
There's
exactly.
there's a lot of commodity players. You need to be able to provide that user an experience that is beneficial, that you're going to increase that lifetime value.
Yeah.
And then you're going to be able to go out and market against that user more aggressively with higher CPAs, because you know you're going to get the outcome that you want.
Yeah. Like I'll give a shameless plug for Billy Bishop Airport, which is where I work. I don't know how many people have traveled through there, but that is an airport that is people always call it the un-airport because it's small, it's dynamic, it's
Yeah.
friendly, it's convenient. So, people who travel through Billy Bishop love Billy Bishop. And a lot of people see airports as this necessary evil that you need to get through to get to your destination. And, one of the biggest compliments we hear, and we hear it a lot, is, is that, it's a part of the journey in the sense that it's enjoyable.
Yeah.
It's such an efficient experience. There's none of the processing of the passenger is not cumbersome. It's usually done very quickly. So, to that our point about sort of how you measure things, we measure the success of that airport. I mean, certainly based on how many people come through our front door every day, but we also base it on quality surveys. We do a lot of that kind of thing with our passengers. What do you like about us? What do you not like about us? Where's the improvement opportunities? It is a different travel experience because our KPIs are not entirely linked to the number of people we get through the front door. It's linked to things like, service quality, cleanliness of facility, efficiency getting through from, curb to gate. All of those things we measure, and they actually mean a lot to us. So as I said, we win awards every year for this kind of thing. We're immensely proud of it, and we're proud of it because a lot of airports don't, again, it becomes this necessary evil, this thing you got to go through to get on your plane to get to the place you want to go. But I remember one passenger saying to me once, he got out of the cab, he's like, my vacation starts when I get out of the cab at Billy Bishop, which is lovely, right? Like he
Yeah.
sees walking through the tunnel or taking the ferry to the terminal or all those things as part of the experience. So yeah, so I think it just comes back to, yeah, of course you got to measure quantity, but you also have to measure quality.
Yeah, I agree. I think Billy Bishop's a great example of how airport travel can be done correctly. I kind of equate it to taking a train in Europe. It's very straightforward. You show up, as long as you have all your documents, you're going to be through security very quickly. You're going to be on a plane very easily. It's easy to get to. When I lived downtown, one of my favorite things was traveling to Billy Bishop because you could just walk there with
Yeah,
your bag
yeah,
and nobody cared. There was no one harassing you at the front door. They're like, go walk to Pearson.
yeah,
Like,
exactly. Well, yeah, and a lot of airports are built like a fortress. And
yes.
it's interesting. We survey this stuff, and more than 50% of our travelers use the bus, TTC. They walk or they bike. So people arriving in single vehicle cars is actually the minimum. The majority of our passengers arrive through public transit, like the TTC. But a lot ride their bikes. The bike share outside Billy Bishop Airport is one of the top three in the entire city. And I think a lot of that is because people get off their plane and they jump on a bike and they take a bike home, which is unheard of. It's very European. But even Europe doesn't have walkable airports. We are a very walkable, bikeable airport. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's a different way of measuring yourself.
Yeah, the closest I can compare it to is the airport in Nice, but even that has security at the front that will look at you like you're crazy if you walk up to it
Yeah,
still.
yeah,
Whereas here, that's not the case.
yeah.
Are there non-travel brands that travel brands can learn from? Apple's focus on high-end design, Lululemon's local community integrations, Amazon's instant gratification with same-day delivery. What in travel could be stolen from other brands? I'm thinking specifically on subscription models. They're everywhere. There's now vets with subscription models. Like, is there a space for subscriptions in travel, and what would that look like?
Yeah. I don't know if there's for subscriptions. I mean, I think the key to travel that makes travel different, and other brands have this too, but it's very much about the experience, and it's not even the experience of traveling. It's the anticipation. I mean, I always say to my partner, we should have a trip booked. As soon as we go on a trip, let's book our next trip because the anticipation of the trip is almost as fun as the trip itself. Now that's a good thing and a bad thing because you've been looking forward to this trip so much that when you get there, your expectations are very high, and it doesn't take much to derail your thoughts and hopes. But again, I think the key to travel is just understanding that you are selling something that is about hope and dreams and aspirations and experience. So what comes with that is if it goes really well, you're going to have potentially a traveler for life. If it goes really poorly, you're going to lose that traveler and they may never come back to you because so much, when you're planning a trip, there's so much that goes into it and your heart and your mind is completely engaged in that experience. especially coming out of COVID, I think, we never thought travel wouldn't be an option for
Yep.
us. And and then when it was taken away for, at least a year, depending on where you lived, we just put that much more of a premium on it. And now it's really special because it could go away again, and we've all seen that. It's 99% heart and 1% mind. So you have to make sure you've got that balance right.
I agree.
Yeah.
Uh, do you think there's space for a product where, when we traveled back in December, we were traveling multiple time zones. So I got an app that we inputted all of our flight data, and it told us when to sleep, when to drink coffee, when to stay away from screens to prevent jet lag.
Yeah.
I wonder if people who travel a couple times a year, would they pay a subscription to then never have to pay for seat selection again? Is there room for something like that? Would consumers pay for something like that? Are there third-party companies that are now going to come in and say, like these nickel and dime options, paying for baggage, paying for seats, paying for carry-ons, can that be removed from airlines? And could there be mutual benefit for both the airline, the end user, and a third party?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think
That's
the idea of a concierge kind of service is really, really brilliant. And I think people would pay for it. I mean, I guess it depends on how often you travel. If you travel once a year, it might not be worth your while, and maybe you could just get it for that trip.
yeah,
But I think the idea, I mean, I talked about the emotion of travel, and I think that's really true. But one of the other things that come with that, the heightened emotion, is anxiety, right? So people travel can be anxiety provoking. It's the unknown, right? You travel because you want to explore the unknown, and that's really exciting when it goes well. But when it doesn't go well, then you're into anxiety territory. So I think if you had a concierge who, I think it would have to be more evolved than an app. And I don't know if it's something that is actually, maybe it's AI powered, maybe it has to be human powered. I don't know. But I think a concierge that just takes it to the next level and gives you that advice, and somebody that you could call if something does go awry, that would help steer you in a different direction. I think that would be really valuable. Again, I think it kind of depends on how much you travel, because if you travel a lot, you probably have a higher degree of confidence. If you travel less, then lower degree of confidence. Um, but
yeah.
a scalable cost structure would be probably quite helpful.
I think you nailed it with the anxiety and emotional impact of travel, especially if you travel only a couple times a year. There is a heightened sense of importance in that experience, and a lot of travel booking platforms, airlines, they don't treat it that way for the end user. They treat
Mhm.
it as just a commodity, which it is a commodity, but the ones that push away from that will ultimately, I think, have longer lifetime
Mhm.
value.
Yeah.
If you could, as a thought experiment, if you could force two travel brands to partner together, who would they be and what would they offer?
Um, think of two specific brands. I think it's more the category of brands. I mean, I think, uh, an airline, airport working together with a hotel and um, chamber of commerce of sorts would be a good combination of sort of sectors of business. I can't think of any specific brands because I think that brands offer quite comparable offerings, but I think just helping the end user, the traveler, kind of build that experience, that perfect trip by everyone working together. Yeah.
For me, it would be merging food delivery and airport. So if you could DoorDash a pizza to the gate, I think that would be fun.
Okay.
To finish off, what would be your top travel recommendation, or if money was no object and time was no object, where would you go and why?
Well, my dream trip is to go to South Africa and do a safari. So that's a bucket list for me.
Nice.
So hopefully I'll do that before too much longer. But I think, my overall my tip would be to go and look at markets that are less explored, perhaps. I think my goal when I go to a new city is to try not to look like a tourist or act like a tourist or be a tourist. So that whole going to a place in the dead of summer and there's 5,000 of you in some public square, and yeah, like that's just not for me personally. So I think encouraging people to look at more secondary markets that are untapped or emerging. Everyone goes to Italy in the summer kind of thing and sees the same things, but I think there's a lot of places that are emerging as they will be that in 10 years, but they're not there yet. So I think my recommendation, and this is something AI would be great for, is identifying those places that are up and coming and don't have the crowds and the tourists yet, and you can really get that authentic experience. There's nothing more disappointing than going on a really amazing trip that you've been looking forward to, and then you get to the thing you want to see, and it's just tourists, and you have no sense of what the real culture is. You don't know what anything is because the city's been overtaken. They are catering to the tourists. Everyone's being fed the same food. There's no originality. There's no character. So
Yeah.
that really interesting experience you were looking for has been watered down to cater to the masses. So I think that would be I mean, I every once in a while that happens without me even wanting it to happen. And it's disappointing. And I always kind of come away feeling like that could have done that better. So looking at the untapped markets or the emerging markets to travel to while you still can before their culture becomes watered down.
And that really, I mean, goes to our earlier point that with AI, you'd be able to, or with large language models, you'd be able to find places that are maybe off the beaten path that haven't been completely
Mhm.
saturated now. I've talked to a couple operators of businesses, and they say, every time there's a tour bus that shows up, the whole goal is to get them out of there as quickly as
Yeah.
possible.
Yeah.
But last summer, I had to get a tuxedo for a wedding. I don't have a lot of utility for a tuxedo in my life, so what I would love to do is take that tuxedo, fly to Antarctica, and get a photo next to a penguin. I think that's a life goal, bucket list kind of thing. Well, Deborah, thank you so
Yeah.
much for joining me today. It was great chatting, and looking forward to walking through the tunnel the next time I'm Billy Bishop.
All right. Well, thank you for having me.
Cheers. Take care.